morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining. At CIQ, we're focused on powering the next generation of software infrastructure, leveraging the capabilities of cloud, hyperscale, and HPC. From research to the enterprise, our customers rely on us for the ultimate Rocky Linux, Werewolf, and Apptainer support escalation. We provide deep development capabilities and solutions, all delivered in the collaborative spirit of open source.
All right. Hello and welcome everybody to today's webinar, Automation Tales, with two of my absolute favorite people on this planet. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Greg Sowell and Justin Burdine. So Greg Sowell, he's an automator, a global routing engineer, a story collector, an educator, and a maker. See, Greg Sowell has been routing globally for almost 2 decades. He has worked and consulted for data center groups, banking institutions, municipalities, VoIP providers, ISPs, WISPs, MSPs, and even NBA franchises. He studied computer science in college, but the builder in Greg led him to networking. And he holds multiple certifications, more than I even have time to mention here. He is an amazing man. So, sharing his knowledge with the world, Greg runs his own networking and project blog. You can find him at gregsoul.com. He created and ran over 10 years a podcast called The Brothers WISP, which focuses on the wireless ISP industry. He has also been featured on the cover of Circuit's section of the New York Times and in several other publications, and speaks regularly at networking conferences. He is a lifelong maker. Greg Sowell is obsessed with LED lights, and you can see it in the background of his video in just a moment, and microcontrollers. And he enjoys building light suits. Now, no, I have not seen one of these yet, but I am very looking forward to. In fact, Greg, I just want you to know I would like to see one of those in person, a cool light suit. Okay. A man of many talents, Greg enjoys hacking and learning anything that he can get his hands on. And he is also now is an exciting host of a new podcast called Why Am I podcast, where he has conversations with others about how they became the people that they are today. So I'm also waiting for an invite to be on your podcast, Mr. Soul. So I'll keep you guys posted on that. My next guest today is Justin Burdine. Justin is a seasoned IT professional with an impressive career spanning over 2 decades, marked by his experience in technical sales, consulting, system administration, and secured government hosting. Now, currently, Justin serves as the Director of Solution Engineering here at CIQ, where he leads a team in delivering cutting edge solutions such as our Sender automation platform and Rocky Linux. Now, his role involves fostering trusted relationships with customers to solve their business needs effectively. He's really good at it too. He makes this job, right? Like fun and inviting. Like I always feel a part of the group and the team because of Justin. Now, Justin's technical prowess and problem solving skills were honed through various roles, including senior manager and specialist solutions architect at Red Hat, senior systems architect at Verizon, senior computer systems analyst at K2 Share, and senior systems administrator roles at Phonics and Creative Visual Effects. His early career highlights include contributing to the visual effects and Oscar winning films such as The Matrix and What Dreams May Come. It is so fun to hear him talking about working on those projects. Now, with numerous accolades, including multiple Top Gun sales awards and President's Club winner titles, Justin is renowned for his exceptional problem-solving abilities and his dedication to customer success. He also loves building cool things with lights. Make sure to notice his background as well. And yes, those lights do change. And yes, he did build those himself. And I do not know if he would do it for you as well, but I don't know. I mean, maybe for the right price, right? Okay, well, that's enough out of me, you guys. These are two absolutely stunning, amazing, professional, talented, incredible guys that are going to talk about their experiences with automation. Now, of course, we want you to like and subscribe, but also leave any comments or questions in the chat. Now, this is a recording, so they are not technically live right now, which is really good because there's like storms going on and all kinds of things happening across where these guys live. So we got this pre-recorded for you, but we are going to be watching the chat live. So make sure to leave any comments or questions that you have in there. And then if you want to know more about automation, I mean, one of the reasons why we're doing this series and we're recording it, so we're going to do one each month for a little while, is to really help you and our customers in the world really understand not just like the technical details of how do you automate, how do you use Ansible playbooks for automation, and what is a sender automation platform, and how do we manage all of our playbooks in that platform that CIQ provides. All of that is good, but it's kind of like the details behind it, right? Like the who does this affect and how does this affect us, and some stories behind automation and why it's important to get on that automation horse as quickly as possible. All right, enough out of me, you guys. Let's hear from the boys, and we will see you soon.
I'm Greg Sowell, and welcome to the automation journey. So this is going to be an ongoing series where Justin and I have conversations about things in automation. So I said his name. Let's hear his voice. Hey, Justin.
Hi, guys. Glad to be here with you, Greg. This is going to be a lot of fun, I think. You and I have been doing automation for quite a while. And so, yeah, I think this point of this is to share some stories, figure out some connection points with potential customers, with folks trying to figure this stuff out. We've seen a lot. So I think this is kind of maybe go into war stories or all sorts of different things that people want to talk about. So
yeah, for sure.
Glad to be here.
They gave us kind of some topic to cover, and it started out as IoT and then kind of morphed into someplace Justin wanted us to take us, which I think is really cool, is factory of the future, because that encompasses like so much stuff, right? It's not just IoT, because like when they said IoT, Internet of Things, like one, it feels like an old buzzword at this point for for really just a thing that's always existed and been out there, right? So normally when I think of IoT, I'm thinking like small devices that are in place in situ, usually that are just kind of like sensors and stuff like that, right? But factory of the future goes so much bigger, and so I'd like kind of those bigger things that allow you to really tell a story, like kind of put something together. So Justin, where would you like to start with factory of the future, like keeping in mind that we're talking about automation? Like, so what does that look like to you?
Sorry, Greg, my machine is going haywire right now.
Yeah, no worries.
Apologies. Okay, let me stop something here. Because all of a sudden I lost you, and I think that's either the internet or that is that's my machine working overtime trying to do this. So roll that last sentence back. My apologies. I think it's cleared up now.
I have no idea what it was. It's a stream of consciousness. No. That's what I love.
Yeah.
I just go into a fugue state. I think the last sentence was.
Well, you're talking about IoT being buzzwords and things like that.
Oh yeah. But then I was saying, like, I like the idea of factory of the future because it kind of rolls everything together and allows us to kind of tell an interesting story. So right. I'm curious what kind of story you want to tell today, Justin.
Yeah, no, this actually comes from a conversation I had a while back with a customer who was in this exact situation, right? They are a large industrial company that was doing large scale stuff. I don't want to go into the details of it, but essentially it was, I don't want to give it away, right? But it was essentially a company that was doing large scale building of things, and it'd been around a long, long time. And so their point was trying to figure out, like, well, how do we do this in a modern age? And so a lot of it was trying to say, hey, we've been doing this for, let's say 100 years. Let's go ahead and give it away and say it's building cars. And how do we compete in a modern era where we've got guys who can start from scratch and kind of imagine things from the ground up? And so the point of this exercise with them was to say, well, how do we, with all of the modern technologies that we want to put in a factory, how do we make sure that all of that can stay automated? And what kind of tools can we do that? And one of the things that we explored was, can Ansible do large scale automation at that level, right? We're talking about controlling configurations on just the compute systems that are in an automotive factory. We're talking about things that are maybe even configuring robots and doing updates. And so you're spanning not just like the typical enterprise compute platform, you're spanning really exotic things, like you said, going into IoT and things like that. But when you talk on that scale, you're not just talking little Raspberry Pis here and there. You're talking about really bizarre stuff that needs to be connected to, needs to have a configuration put on it. And then, when you're talking about things that could potentially harm people because there's humans and robots interacting together, those configurations have to be spot on. And they can't just be something that, somebody's going to go through manually and update. So, so that I figured we could kind of explore that space and talk about those use cases and go from there.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So it's like the initial thing that kind of popped in my head when you started talking about this stuff was kind of legacy, right? So it's probably an industry where they are accustomed to doing things the same way. So whenever I think of like industrial automation too, I think about like the energy sector people we've worked with, and those guys, I mean, they are
safety first.
Yeah. I mean, they are like wrapped in safety gear, and then they pad them, and then they put them in a cell, and then they surround that cell with concrete just to make sure these guys are safe, right? So it's just a very slow moving kind of way of thinking. But I think the automotive industry probably is a little bit more forward looking, maybe a little bit faster. And so I'm curious, like legacy migration, I mean, I'm curious, like how you see that actually happening. Like, how do you actually start introducing the automation piece? And I was thinking the very first thing that occurred to me is, and this is oftentimes when we talk to people in legacy industry, to me, it almost starts with your mindset first. Like you have to actually kind of attack that portion, and then you could start talking about how we're going to look at kind of the IT pieces of this. And curious what your experience is with that.
Yeah, well, and you know this really well, and I think a lot of people this will resonate quite a bit with is you can implement automation, configuration management, and things like that, but a good chunk of the heavy lift of implementing that in a company is just the political change that brings in, right? I mean, all of a sudden you're having to not just convince, is this a good enough product to meet our technical needs, but okay, we're going to do things with automation. For some companies, it's a big leap, right? We've been doing it this way. And when you start bringing in things where a computer is going to do something on a person's behalf, security teams really have to digest, what does that really mean? And if it's maybe a legacy or an older company that's had decades of this is how we've done large scale, let's say automotive building, and then we implement compute into that over the decades. And now we're saying, okay, we're going to have these things do things by themselves. That's a lot of heavy lift to take on as a company, not just, again, not technically, but more politically, and selling that among all those different groups, and then getting consensus on, again, what tool do we want to use? What is everybody comfortable with? And so as we talked through this scenario with them, that was a lot of the buy-in, was getting them sold on telling that story internally. And that's a lot of what we do, here at CIQ, is having those stories that we tell internally, help them come up with that story so that we can sell this again to the entire company as a solution, right? And not just something we're throwing out there to get somebody to buy to use in a small piece. Automation really has its value when you do it at scale. So yeah, that was a big heavy lift, was the political stuff.
Yeah, it seems like most of the places that we've gone into, it's the middle where you really have to win those kind of mental victories, right? You got to get not necessarily the people at the top or the people at the bottom convinced of automation, but like if you can start at least in the middle, right? Like that middle management that's over maybe like the infrastructure group or the networking group. I had really good success with networking groups kind of making headway there, but like it had to be like management first, right? It always seemed like if it's just an employee or maybe a small team and they're trying to fight their way up, it can be such like a difficult battle to like convince your management, hey, we need this automation stuff. But if you really truly can get that management buy-in, it seems like you can go both directions pretty easy from there.
Yeah, because part of that is telling the story of, hey, this is not here to take your job, right? I mean, that was the big fear when we first were doing this. Is the big fear was, hey, why would I want this tool? That's all. You're basically trying to do all the stuff that I used to do as part of my job. And really, we had to come in and really have that conversation down at the lower level, saying, no, this isn't your job. This is so you can do other things. But then also having that, like you said, that middle conversation of saying, look, you want this. This is going to be good for you to report up and show what you're doing and the efficiencies you're adding. But also then this is good for just knowledge transfer as you bring people in and out. And just as the normal course of a company, bringing people in and out of a company, you want to be able to keep that knowledge in the company. Otherwise, these traditional empire builders inside of IT, when they leave, all of a sudden that's a good chunk of value that's leaving the company because of that. And so this allows for that innovation to still happen, and for people to really have their space, but it's doing a lot more intelligent stuff than being the keeper of, I do all the firewall changes. I mean, like that's you can do that, but I mean, that's definitely a career, I guess.
Yeah, it's a boring existence. I can't imagine anybody wants to go to work and be George Jetson, where
Right.
he literally just pushes the same button over and over all day long.
It's cool for like a day. I would think maybe even a week that'd be cool. But, like doing that like long term, at some point you're looking and going, "This is what I do, man. I just hit that
It
button."
reminds me of like this episode of The Simpsons where Homer like automated his job for that little bird, like the dipping
Yep.
bird, and just have it push the button. Yeah, dude. It's
Yep.
like, I would definitely try and figure out a way to do it. And like, I know I haven't like worked kind of in industrial environment, but I did do data center stuff for a really long time. And so I had to automate, sometimes just software pieces, but also like physical pieces. And so to that bird analogy, there was a customer one time where we had, I don't know what happened in their system, but they needed us to go up and check a tape drive every 15 minutes, literally like clockwork, and make sure that if the tape had ejected, that we had to pull it out and then stick in the next one in the rotation. And so for whatever reason, for like this 3-month period, every 15 minutes, we were supposed to do that. And I was like, there's no way we're doing this. This is insanity. So I ended up using an infrared sensor and attached it right next to the tape drive, hooked that into essentially like a PLC that was monitoring it. And when it saw saw the beam break, it would just send an email to us. And so it ended up, saving us untold man hours. It was pretty intense, but just stuff from things like that. And then I remember there was a fun one too, where in the basement of our building, we had a sump pump because there was a lower floor that was below ground level. And that was the gray water tank. And at one point it overflowed in that room. So I made what we called the poop alarm. So it just monitored the sump pump levels and make sure that if it got above a certain level, the pumps were running. So it can be, like practical little things like that too.
It's funny you bring those types of solutions up. That's one of the conversations I had years ago was with a person. I was actually at a VMware training, and the person was kind of relaying their story about what they had to do for their job because the company he was working at was such a monolithic thing. Basically, there's just years and years of legacy compute, and they didn't trust VMs, and they didn't really fully understand them. So somebody had said, part of your job is to take these magnets that had the VM names and put them anytime it vMotion from one system to another. You have to go into the data center and move that magnet from the front of one computer to another. Don't even start me on the fact that you're putting magnets near computers. That right there just blows my mind. But when he was telling the story, I'm just like, years later, I was thinking, God, boy, that guy needed some automation, needed some kind of thing to just be like, hey, man, here's your report. Here's where these systems are. You do not need to do this. So, but yeah, that's the kind of stuff. These are definitely a bit comical, what we're describing, but they are things. These are all elements that make up reasons why people, adopt automation. These are things that in my mind, that's not the type of work I want to be doing. And I think everybody wants to have some level of pride and stuff that they're doing, and they feel like they're innovating, even if the innovation is personally, big for you, but maybe not in innovative, I guess, in a larger scale, but or on the outside. But these are things that I think we want, and the reason why we want to really kind of adopt this automation.
Yeah, for sure. I thought we'd let's talk about where the rubber meets the road. So some of the industrial customers I've worked with that wanted to implement IT automation. So really just like putting Ansible and kind of Ascender in that infrastructure. It's like, where did we start with that? And I think the very first place, because it was always a crawl, walk, run sort of mentality, right? Like one, especially once, because normally these people I would talk to, there was like the manufacturing side and there was the enterprise side, right? So enterprise, that's going to be all your business people, HR, finance, all that stuff. And then you move over to the manufacturing side, and things got very strict when you got over to the manufacturing side. And so whenever you were touching any piece of equipment in there, right, you could, be affecting the assembly line, which would shut down production, or, worse, it could be something that had kind of, health implications, right? You could be affecting some kind of life safety system, right? And so they were always just super careful in there. So I think the very first place I entered doing IT automation on the manufacturing with most of my customers was via compliance.
Mhm.
Right. We've got all this stuff that exists, and I'll narrow it down to just one use case. Like I remember there was one where it was the networking team. So they have all of this network infrastructure out there, right? Supporting all of your sensors, your access points that are tying all this stuff together, like all of this new equipment, or you know what, even all the legacy equipment, all that stuff's pulling all that information together. They're doing it through the network, right? And so how do we make sure that our networks are configured the way they're supposed to? A lot of these people have like compliance standards they have to adhere to, so they got to get audited, they got to do all this stuff, so they have to every so often prove to some body, some organization that, hey, yeah, we are meeting all this criteria. And so anybody who's done anything in networking knows sometimes there's break fix, things will go down, you run out there, you duct tape that things together. There was a guy I used to work with who said the most permanent solution is a temporary fix. So you go out there, you duct tape something together, it works.
That's
Please
great.
don't touch it, especially in those manufacturing environments, right? It's like, it's just got to work. And so what we would do is we would write automations. I actually have a blog post on it where we would look at their switch, we would connect into it, we would pull basically all the information off of it. We do a CDP neighbors, look at all of the infrastructure that was actually attached to this thing. And then we had templates set up for each type of interface, right? So if it was like a printer, it was supposed to look like this. If it was just a regular user workstation, it was supposed to look like that. If it was this part of the manufacturing, that part, like all that stuff, we just had little templates. And so we would pull the interface, determine what type it was supposed to be, compare it to the template. Did it skew? If yes, add it to a report. So anything that was anomalous, right? Even if it just completely, we had no idea what it was, it would get added to the report. All that would get aggregated and delivered to them. They could take it as a CSV. I know that's not like very fancy, but right,
It works.
you take that information and then you can do triage on it. It's like, why are these things configured this way? And then you take that same thing, you make your notes in that CSV, you feed it back into the automation, and then would actually go and make just visual adjustments to those things, right? So it didn't necessarily have to make any like big sweeping changes. Really, you can just gather information and make your life easier. Because I know you talked about security as well earlier. Security teams always want you to audit this, audit that. And now here's like an easy way to do that. So to me, kind of the first thing going in is anything that's tedious, time consuming, anything that happens on a regular schedule, let's automate that stuff, right? Just to get people comfortable with the system, get it moving in.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, like you said, you brought up the security aspect, and that's really kind of my background, which is being a part of those audits, right? And the best thing you can do for an auditor and for your interactions with an auditor is give them a reason why, right? And when the minute we flipped over from doing things manually, which was like literally going through these checklists, and it was just awful. And this was way back before we really had configuration management and everything was shell scripts. But we do those, we write some scripts, or we would write, or we would go through these checklists. And the minute we flipped over configuration management, we literally started building these kind of, like I said, playbooks where here's the setting and here's the reason why we're setting it this way. And then what's even better is, hey, this compliance setting says we have to do it this way. And we end up not doing that for whatever reason. I think a good example of that is like your local setting for passwords needs to be 16 characters or whatever it is. But if you're using LDAP, that setting is worthless on the local machine, right? Or could be. And I'm just using an example. Because you're mitigating that at a different level. And so, but the report will still come back and say, hey, your setting's not this way. So by using configuration management, you can either choose to go ahead and set that, or if it's a conflicting configuration, you have to leave it by the default value, then you can put in that playbook, here's exactly why. So when you sit down with that auditor, not only are you showing them, hey, by the way, we use configuration management, immediately they're like, okay, cool. This person is not just winging this. They're not just doing manual changes. So there's a level of confidence and trust you're building with that auditor, but then also then showing them like, hey, I've thought about this conversation prior to sitting down with you. I'm not making up these excuses on the spot. I'm proactively thinking about security, and that's really all an auditor really wants, and really what security people want as well. They just want you to. They want to feel like the rules and policies they're putting in place are actually being cared about, because they do matter, right? Sometimes they get in the way and sometimes they're frustrating and all that good stuff. But in reality, they're generally put in there for a good reason. So again, that configuration management is kind of like it's the technical thing that does what you need it to do, but it also can be so much more used as so much more in that kind of political realm, if you will, inside of a company. So yeah, just, couldn't agree with you more on that.
Yeah, man, that's like such a good point. Like, so I've done network engineering for most of my career, and it's funny that like security is always a second thought. Like it feels that way, right? Like just the very first thing you're doing is like trying to figure out how do I, get this wire from there and just like physically make all this stuff happen. And so we're not usually kind of, I'm generalizing here. Most networking folks I talk to aren't normally thinking about security while they're building that infrastructure.
Right.
But I like
They're
your
trying to make it work.
yeah, 100%. Like I need to make this work. But it sounds like your approach is more of, hey, as I'm going through this, as I approach a thing and it's like, oh, I don't actually need that password security here because I'm doing it somewhere else, just make a note. And you're doing that in your automation. Like it literally lives inside of this. So it's not like I have to go back 7 months from now and try and figure out what I was thinking when I did this thing. It's
Yeah.
like you're actually building it in line, which is awesome.
Yeah, and that's one of the hardest things to do, right? Is implement automation on brownfield, right? Stuff that exists that has existed for years. Nobody knows exactly what's on that system, who even owns it sometimes, and really by starting from that, that's a big mind shift that I had to make. Because automation came kind of middle of my career. I had to make that shift of like starting first with just getting it to work to now before we do that, what's the battle plan here? Like if I was going to build the system, let's at least, what are my steps that I'm going to do? And a lot of times as you're building, you're like, I didn't even think about that. I need to write that in. As long as you've got that battle plan, then you can go back and make that really, really easily. Brownfield, you just gotta, if you're going to go start attacking those systems, it's something you definitely want to do because again, if you're building with configuration management for all your new stuff, you definitely want to make sure you're going back to that other stuff because again, that's also can be part of your DR planning. Like what am I going to do? Am I going to go to the tape systems and pull this stuff back off? And who knows how long that's going to take? Or do we just have a battle plan from the beginning that we're just going to build these things over should we need them? And then really your focus is on where do we keep that data? How do we keep it redundant and quickly accessible? So
yeah, I like that. I like the kind of the unspoken point there with brownfield is that, yeah, it can be difficult. And sometimes that stuff can feel almost impossible. So yeah. What's your advice for going into a brownfield? I think the first thing that hops in mind is just start with low hanging fruit. Just start with like little easy pieces and just, start kind of eating your way around it. But what have you seen that works for you?
Yeah, and a lot of my experience comes from doing large scale migrations, right? Where you're talking to customers that are needing to move thousands of systems. And that's exactly how we approach it. We start with, what's the easy stuff? And as we build them into kind of migration waves, you're basically saying, okay, how am I going to rebuild these systems once we get over there? Or what are we doing with them? And it's exactly that. You start with the easy stuff, just so you can get the process under your belt and iterate because you're going to have a process that you think is how you're going to do it. And inevitably, even when we were doing, 20 or 30 large scale migrations as a team a year, you're from the beginning of that year to the end of that year, not only is each customer going to be different, but your process changes as new technologies get adopted or you run into new stuff. So absolutely, it needs to be iterative so you can move fast and quickly and you're not stuck on, oh my gosh, this one problem system that we need to get done. Maybe there's a priority or reason it needs to be done sooner or quicker, but the problem is you essentially get stuck on some of the harder pieces and don't enable it or it doesn't give you the advantages of moving quickly through that stuff to quickly address and find maybe automation playbooks or things that can solve those and then can be later plugged together to do that harder, much larger scale rebuild of a system or whatnot.
Yeah. And something else that makes me think of is it's actually kind of a combination of things that one of them came from Jimmy, kind of our fearless pocket ninja. He so I used to just essentially write my automations that would go in and configure things, right? And in kind of a brownfield situation, it's the same thing, right? You're writing an automation that's going to configure something. And then, like you said, you've got that automated, you move on to the next. Well, part of that too is making sure there's not configuration drift, right? So making sure that things are as they're supposed to be. Like I wrote the playbooks, we fired them off, we did it now, but that doesn't mean, a couple months or even weeks from now, somebody's not going to go into a system and then just make a little tweak, right? And how do we know that actually changed? And so something Jimmy taught me was don't just write your playbooks to make those configuration changes, actually write them in such a way that you can also use them for auditing purposes. So that's something I'm a big advocate for is compliance checking. I'm not necessarily a compliance enforcement person. That freaks me out from some of the environments I used to work in. Like the idea of, I know that this thing should be in this state, but I'm outside of a maintenance window and I have something that's automatically going every night that might enforce compliance. That freaks me out. Like we would just do all of our changes inside of a window unless it was break fix, right? So I guess all environments are different, but the idea being I can write a piece of automation that will make that configuration change, but then I can schedule it to run every night in essentially a check mode, and it will find any variants for any of the devices, just generate a report for me and send it to me, maybe put a ticket in the system, whatever it happens to be. I'd much rather get nagged. Is the example I always use is the network would break at 1 a.m. I would groggily get up and I would duct tape something back together, and I'd be in bed by 2:30. Well, if 3 o'clock the compliance enforcement script runs through, the automation runs and undoes all of my duct tape, we're going to have a bad time, right? So I'd much rather get nagged with a report for 2 weeks while whatever the thing is gets repaired than I would for it to break over and over again. So I love the idea of being able to not only write your automations to do the things you want them to do, but also to double check everything, make sure we're still good, make sure we're still compliant. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So we talked about how we kind of crawl into the environment, but factory of the future, I know you had some really cool stories about various components and like doing interesting stuff. So one, I thought it would be interesting just to kind of hear your perspective on what factory of the future looks like. Because I think a lot of times, we can borrow from other industries. Like I've seen the petroleum guys do some interesting stuff that could get used over in retail. I've seen the retail people like come up with some processes that really could be useful in various places. So what did you see with that automotive manufacturer that you thought was really cool?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that was interesting to me was just the scale of it. Also, the fact that it wasn't just traditional IT, right? We're not just saying, hey, let's do some configuration management on these, servers that are sitting in these different stations that are building stuff, but also configuring the robots. And that was the stuff that was new to me, right? I'd been familiar with the concept of operational technology and how that's implemented and what that means to each different customer that's implementing that. But I think there's also a level of what does that really mean in terms of dealing with human and robotic interaction and those kind of things. And the fact that configuration management was being considered for even that, like that to me was really cool, that there were checks and balances being put in place to say, hey, we want to make sure that these gates are always set this way for these types of systems. Because in this scenario, we were going from a traditional assembly line, which really, if you think about it, that was decades and decades of something was more than 100 years ago, right? And so this concept of we start here and we end here, and it's all built out, and then humans come and interact with that stuff and build the car. And by the end of the assembly line, the car is built. Well, then 80s came along and robots came along. We start replacing some humans with a lot of the monotonous stuff, but they didn't really change the assembly line. The assembly line has been the same, right? They just kind of pulled the people out, put robots in. There was safety guards and things like that put in place to keep people safe and things like that, But all in all, it was kind of still the same concept. Well, the concept now, this factory of the future, the idea is, hey, we want to basically have almost an assembly line that can be configured and reconfigured. If you look at any kind of the stuff that Elon Musk has done with Tesla, really, you're seeing kind of a lot of that, where it's not just one assembly line. Things happen here. They can reconfigure the line. They can even pull broken stuff out, and stuff can go back in. So, again, all of that is then being controlled in part by configuration management, which is super exciting. Again, because my little brain just thinks, oh, well, the server needs to be set this way. But now we're talking about we can actually reconfigure the assembly line based on configuration management, which is really a cool concept.
Yeah, and something else. So I did a little bit of research kind of in this area, which again, not an expert in, but a lot of what they were talking about was data. That's become like kind of the core of like what they see like the manufacturing stuff moving to, right? That's going to be information collection from layout, like we talked about, like the start of this whole thing, IoT, right? You got little sensors and stuff like that. But then as technology progresses, you'll be able to pull all kind of information from all kinds of different objects. So like one of the things they were talking about were like the robots and how they can pull information, say, for example, like the motor, like how hard is the motor working, right? So they can start getting statistical analysis of that over time and like predict failures. Another thing, so I have like got to do some tours of like some power plants and stuff like that. And what fascinated me was a lot of their monitoring is acoustic. So they just have basically microphones placed all over the place, and they are constantly monitoring the frequency and volume of sound coming off of everything. So they can actually predict, oh, this bearing is about to go out over this thing. Like based on the sounds they hear, they're like, this sounds like a bearing, and they can predict how long it's going to be before it fails, and kind of even give them sort of a rough triangulation of where in the environment that thing may be. So just being able to pull in tons of data. But I mean, it's not just pulling in that data. Now we got to do something with it. So one is like the IT automation is going to go configure and manage all of that sensor infrastructure, right? It's going to do all that stuff. But then also you got to take that someplace, and it's configuring where to send all of that stuff, right? And then maybe even build out the infrastructure that's going to be doing it, right? So it could be like edge compute. A lot of these places I think have essentially like little micro data centers, right?
Yep.
Inside their environment to do all that.
Yeah. Each
crunching.
Yep. Each and in fact, each station, assembly station, has its own set of compute there as well. So it's not just all going back to the data center, and a lot of that is because of what you're talking about. There are tons of sensors right there, and there's no reason to send, especially when you're doing a lot of imaging stuff, where you're looking at you're processing the images with AI, looking for, hey, did this thing do the thing it's supposed to do every time, or do we have a fire in the factory? What do we do with a fire? And one of the scenarios was, in the event of a fire, I want these assembly stations to be able to pull away from wherever there's danger in the factory. So the assembly line can essentially pull itself apart and go protect the equipment that's in there. And so that's just all that crazy stuff that's being considered for this that I just find absolutely fascinating. So you're not wrong. It's not centralized. It is actually happening kind of at each station.
Yeah. And what I've seen too is like there are like pockets of automation from vendors, right? So like you've got a vendor that's supplying X device. Well, they'll have maybe some little automation tool that allows you to just do that, right? And then Y vendor has some little automation tool that but there's obviously no like cohesive ecosystem that maintains it all. So you still have to have some, I don't know, I like to call it DevOps duct tape to like pull all that stuff together, right? Like to actually be able to communicate. So instead of having to piecemeal touch all of these things, like go into this controller, go into that controller. You can actually, oftentimes, and this is the Kool-Aid that I drink and I try and espouse, is like keep your infrastructure as code, right? Like actually like in a Git repository somewhere. That way you can push all that stuff, have the automation consume it, and then push that out to various things. For me, it also makes change control really streamlined, because that was another thing, like especially in like environments like this that are highly audited. And I don't know why I'm pointing to my notes over here. You have no idea that I'm doing that, but
I thought you were talking about the factory that's over there. So,
the one I keep over there in the bathroom.
Right.
So in those environments, it's just such a pain in the butt to maintain all of that stuff, all these disparate systems. So let's tie it all together. Let's have something that just keeps the code, pushes that out. Yeah.
Without a doubt. And I love your analogy, the duct tape, because that's so much of what I view Ansible as, because it is so it's got so many connection points. And even if you have to just go back down to the shell or connect up to some exotic thing, it's the statement I always love making about Ansible is it's not whether it can do something, because I yet to run into something where it can't do it. The bigger question is, should we use it? Right? And so, like you're saying, when you've got all these different types of systems and different platforms, and having something that has that much touch and that much connection points and capability and scalability, it really was a game changer. And I'm not really talking about the factory at this point, but even just traditional IT. So yeah, it's that versatility, I think, is really what makes it magical, because you don't have to have some kind of agent that runs on that system. All you have to do is be able to connect to the darn thing. And sometimes I can do that in types of cross serial ports and things like. You can do exotic things to bridge those connections to make it actually work. Sometimes you just got to get creative.
Yeah, for sure. So, I was thinking about, like, if I wanted to quantify some of the important pieces, I was thinking one is anybody looking to, in any environment, right? I mean, I'm thinking about manufacturing a lot right now, but if you want to invest in a new technology, like these guys that are retrofitting their facilities to do manufacturing and stuff, it's a huge expense they're going into, right? And it's not just money, right? I mean, it's also employees' time. I mean, I guess that does equate to money. But it's also, you got to remember the people piece, right? So how do we phase this stuff in, and a lot of it is crawl, walk, run, like do the little things at a time. But also I was thinking about, like, on the people side, how do we best sell the idea of it, right? And for me, it helps bridge that skill gap for people, right? You've got the legacy folks that are used to doing it the old way. You hopefully have some new people that are embracing the new ways. But automation, especially if you make it like click button, you can make it really simple, right? So make the automation easy to consume. And so that's what we do a lot of times, or at least that's what Justin and I spend a lot of our times doing, is trying to make this thing as simple as possible. And oftentimes, if you have an interface that people are already using, you've got some ITSM or some, I don't know, just some business system in there that has buttons that can make an API call. Those users can start using automation. They don't even have to know it's there. They don't have to know that you're automating things on the back end. All they have to know is where to go and which button to push. And you really can obfuscate some of the complexity for your people using this, right? Like help ease them into it, right? As much as probably a lot of people here listening rail against GUIs, I'm a huge advocate, right? As somebody who has worked with Windows admins most of my life and been a network engineer, like if you can give me some easy buttons to ease into a new system, man, I'm all for it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I've always found that if you've got a command line, you've got a GUI, and you've got an API, you basically you're hitting all of the people who are going to try to consume automation. And so that's where I think Accenture really plays well in that, because it can provide that extra integration and those extra features in there.
Yeah. All the pieces we're talking about, compliance, like reporting, all that, it's all baked in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of the things I was going to ask you is because you've done a lot more recent customer kind of interactions and questions, like, what do you see as the most effective way for a company to adopt automation? Say I'm company and I'm trying to get into this world, but we've tried and failed a number of times. What have you seen as the most effective way to really kind of get that wide adoption and be successful at this?
I would say the number one thing is a trusted partner. From genuinely, it's for multiple reasons. A lot of times automation, when it fails internally, it's because they can't decide on something, right? One group believes we should do it this way with this tool. This other group believes maybe it's the same tool, but we have a completely different thought process on all this stuff, right? If you actually have a neutral third party that can come in and say, here's some good practices. I never say best practices, I always say good. Here's some good practices. Let's look at how we can kind of implement those for you. Maybe let's kind of essentially be a mediator in this scenario, like just help you determine like what a good automation practice looks like for you, right? Because genuinely, you can't hand somebody a script and they run it. Every customer is different. They have different needs. They have different wants. I think that's really important. But also having somebody who's done this multiple times, starting from the ground, can be really useful, right? I've used to be the kind of person that could never ask for help. And now the first thing I do is, who do I know that's an expert on these things? And let me ask them. Let me kind of combine their amassed knowledge over time and use that to my advantage. I think it was Neil Armstrong had this quote, and he said, when you're going to the moon, if the landing is off by an inch, it's no big deal. But when you leave, you're taking off for the moon. If you're off by an inch, you're going to miss it by 1,000,000 miles, right? So sometimes like having somebody to help you, align the rocket for that initial launch can make all the difference, right? And also it can ease your mind, like knowing that you've got somebody who's here to help you. Like if I run into a jam, I got some assistance. Right. To me, that's where I've been moving through my career. It used to be, I wanted to do all this stuff. I wanted to figure it all out. And now I have so much stuff going. Like I don't have time for that. I really just want to find a trusted person that can kind of assist me through the process. I would say that's probably the most important piece. I'm curious what you think is.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely a great point. I think that's so true in kind of so many different things. But yeah, I would say you kind of can't do this halfway. You really, if you're going to adopt something like this, it's generally such a big change for a company too, because you're really, especially if your workers have really not not been exposed to this, it's a big change. Again, I say politically, that's a sometimes very hard for customers to get through. So you but other times it's technically as well. Like, you've got to have your people on board with this. So a lot of that is selling it to them, saying this is going to be good for your career. Luckily, we now, I think we're far enough down the path that everybody's realized that is something you have to really have for your job, and to kind of continue on. But I think also there is, going back to the whole adopt it or don't, do or do not, there is no try. I mean, you really have to just go all in. And so that's buy-in at the very top, that's buy-in at the middle, like we were talking about, and that's buy-in down in the ground. Once you have that and you have that trusted partner, then you kind of, I think that's working together. And we've done a lot of hackathons over the years, and those have been really, really successful because, again, it's a partner coming in to come alongside and work with a company to get them through that journey, because it is pretty daunting to go out and go alone on that. So I think the ones that we've had the most success, the customers I've seen that have had the most success, are the ones that really have leaned into that and said, we're going all in. We want this trusted partner, and we want to really kind of figure out how we can do this. And we don't want to try to figure it out on our own, because, like you said, you're losing a lot of cycles to trying to figure this out versus going with somebody who's done it a bunch of different times. So I think that's where we've had a lot of success.
I think, to your point too, you touched on something good, is that what we would do early is try and educate the customer as quickly as possible, get people up to speed as fast as possible. And then after that, do a hackathon, which means not only are you up to speed, you're ready to start doing stuff, but hey, let's take some real use cases and let's bang our heads against them for 3 days. Let's actually write some automation, get you in the movement, in the motions, right? It's like you gotta get those reps in. How many free throws do you have to shoot before you can make it in the NBA? You gotta get there. But also, it helps if you got a coach and you're not just doing it on your own trying to figure it out. So it definitely makes a big difference.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
You ready to stick a fork in this?
I think we are. Yeah. So I guess we're going to keep doing these.
Yeah. We're going to keep doing these. I'm curious, anybody listening, if you have any ideas for what they would like us to do next, any specific topics or industries, or anybody that potentially might think they want to be a guest, I would be interested in as well.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, I would love to interact with folks who are actually implementing this. So if you guys are going through any stage of this, love to have those kind of conversations, have you on and talk through it. We don't have to get into the specifics. We can just talk kind of concepts. We can do whatever we really want, which is fun. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, please comment. Please tell us how bald we are and how it makes you feel. Makes you finally feel seen to have two bald guys talking at you at the same time. No, but genuinely, we always anticipate, or rather, I don't ever anticipate anybody's going to give me feedback. I always appreciate feedback, right? We're not just screaming into the void, and help us make this better, help us learn a little bit more. Appreciate it. So I'm going to say thank you, Justin, and thank you, listeners.
Cheers.
Oh, guys, that was awesome. And yes, I do appreciate my lovely locks as I'm hanging out with you two guys. Okay, too much fun. Thank you, everybody, so much. Again, as they said, we would love to chat with you. I mean, okay, so he mentioned a hackathon. So I just want to let you know that is something that CIQ provides for our customers. So typically it's 5 days of getting down into the weeds of your exact environment and helping you guys set up fully your Ansible automation via a Sender platform. So yes, a wonderful value add. Let's talk about it. So go to CIQ.com. There's some more information that you can find there. If you want to actually have a conversation with one of these guys and talk about your specific use case and how maybe some automation might play into what you guys are doing and how we can really implement this knowledge transfer that they were talking about, awesome. Yes, we want to hear from you. Alrighty, we'll hope that you guys have a really wonderful day. Again, thank you, amazing Justin and amazing Greg, for coming on here. We're going to be doing a lot more of these. So if you have questions about automation, about Ansible, let us know. Have a beautiful day. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Bye-bye.